Welcome to the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, but today, just a kid. We have an extra special guest to tie into this week's Super Bowl episode. When I was growing up, Larry Csonka was one of my favorite athletes. In his mid-20s, he led the Miami Dolphins to the only undefeated season in NFL history, a mark that still stands almost 50 years later. His power and determination were a sight to see, and he was even a guest star on my favorite TV show at the time, which of course was The $6 Million Man. Now at age 74, he continues to live a very active life and provided some wonderful insights for all of us when it comes to health, wellness, and performance, along with a fun little trip down memory lane. On the coaching front, if you're looking to pursue your health and wellness coaching certification, including, if desired, the MBHWC National Board Certification, your next two opportunities are March 20th and 21st, or June 5th and 6th. Now, most of our programs fill up early, so please don't wait too long to register if this is important to you. All of the details at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or feel free, reach out to us anytime. We can answer all your questions, spend some time chatting about it. It's results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. For everyone else, don't miss our growing library of health, wellness, performance videos at youtube.com/coaching channel, including early access to many of our podcast guests, and this is one of them. Now, let's take a walk down memory lane and what it means for our own lives on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. It is very much my pleasure today to welcome Larry Csonka to the Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. This is so much fun.
Fun to be here with you, Brad. We got quite a history. We go back a long way.
Yes, we do. I was showing Larry some of the pictures that the Dolphins sent me. I was a native of Denver, Colorado, cheering for the Miami Dolphins with every ounce of my heart. And I won't share all the embarrassing stories around that. But let's start off by getting a little nostalgic here. 2022 will mark 50 years since your Dolphins became the only team in NFL history to go undefeated. Now, I did not realize this. You entered the Super Bowl 16-0, obviously, but you were underdogs to the Redskins. What do you remember? We talk a lot about mental toughness and resilience, that kind of stuff on this show. What do you remember going through your head in the moments leading up to kickoff on a game where you're undefeated, but you're the underdog?
Well, quite frankly, we were so concentrated on getting back to the Super Bowl. The success we had an opportunity to obtain in Super Bowl VII came off the initiative from Super Bowl VI, where we got our butts kicked royally by the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
From that game forward, we had a driving force named Shula, our head coach. And right after Super Bowl VI, he got us in the locker room and said, I want you to remember what this feels like, because he had lost the Super Bowl to Joe Namath years before.
Oh, that's right, with the Colts.
Baltimore, remember?
Yeah.
So he knew the road and how it was going to be. He said, starting here, we want a total commitment each week. We want to make the Super Bowl every week. That's what led to the undefeated season.
Yeah.
Nobody ever talked about winning them all.
Sure. Of course not.
A seasonal situation.
Right.
That just happened because of what happened there. But then we led off. And when we kicked off for that Super Bowl, to answer your question, in 7, we were a little uptight. More than a little. The collar was buttoned clear up. We had a lot of starch in our collar because we were like, But as the game, the great thing about the game of football, as soon as you hit somebody or get hit by somebody, it loosens things up immediately. Then we started to do what we were best at, and that was concentrate and control the ball. And we had a great, great defense.
Yeah.
They called the no-name defense because they were so intelligent and played such fine football. They had 5 mental errors the entire season.
Wow.
No-name defense.
Wow.
So once it got rolling, then we had control. But it got kind of hairy right there at the end. If you were a fan, you remember Garo Premium's famous pass.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, everybody remembers that. Poor Garo.
And then 50 years before, there had been no one that had done it. And then 51 years or 52 years since, hopefully, no one else has done it. So it'll be 100 years or 101 years right now of no one going from the first game to the championship without losing a game somewhere. We were the only team to do that.
Now, you talk about Shula getting you guys dialed in after you lost to the Cowboys, but frankly, your turnaround that year when you went to the Super Bowl was pretty tremendous. I might be remembering incorrectly, but it seems like you'd been something like 4-10 the previous year, and then when Shula came in, you flipped the dial, and suddenly you're one of the top teams in the league. What was it? Similar type of mindset change?
You hit it right on the head. Right? Not only our game plan changed, our lifestyle changed. He wanted us dedicated. He wanted us to eat right, sleep right. These are things that people, you deal in it.
Sure. Yeah.
People say, and they, I eat right, sort of. Wasn't sort of. He laid out the team diet at training camp explicitly. I mean, he was very much into that.
Interesting.
He was also into punctuality. If he said you need the meeting started at 8:00, you better be there at 5:10 because he shut the door at 2 minutes till, and you had to beat it down to get in.
Wow.
The other thing he did, and this is something that you'll get a kick out of, because if you talk about things that we did that you can do for yourself individually, as we did as a team, was he said, we are going to play football in subtropical heat. So game day is going to be anywhere from 77 degrees to perhaps 91 degrees.
Plus humidity.
If you've ever been in the Orange Bowl, at 91 degrees, you can appreciate because it's like 130 down on the playing field.
Exactly.
So what's that lead to? You're a conditioner. You know what I'm talking about. We've got to make this team. Now I'm quoting Don Shula. We have to raise an ability in ourselves to be camel-like. We have to be able to withstand this heat. So we practice twice a day in training camp. We would practice at 9:00 in the morning in full pads, full regalia. And very often it would be in the high 80s, mid 80s to high 80s at the time we went out to practice.
Sure.
Then we'd practice a second time at 3:00 in the afternoon. And sometimes, most often in July, August, and September, when those 2-a-days took place, it was pushing 100 degrees, the high 90s to 100 degrees on the field. And we learned to practice and perform in that. Now, not all the teams that came, but a lot of the teams that came in August, September, and early October from winter places such as Buffalo or New York, sure. You go into that Orange Bowl, it's a tiny little place that's all closed in and it's 95 degrees. And pretty soon you see the other team slugging water like crazy. Well, we never had any water on the practice field. We learned to be camel-like.
Wow.
And it didn't kill us, so therefore it was good. I don't know if you could do that today.
Yeah, I don't think you get away with that today. Wow, that is so interesting.
But it worked. For us, it worked.
Yeah, interesting. So the whole mindset and using these things to sharpen you and make you stronger. It reminds me of another story you talked about in one of your videos. You were born on Christmas. You talk about being the youngest and the smallest. Now, I want everybody to get this perspective. If you don't know Larry Csonka, if you're not over 40 years old right now and you didn't just live and die by this guy every Sunday growing up, then let me give you a perspective. Last name Csonka is perfect. The Zonk, like he would get the tough yardage, although we'll also talk about later, you led the league in yards per carry one year, which is stunning based on your just the way that you ran the ball. But you were the youngest and smallest in your school for years. How did that influence the trajectory of your life? Because the story I heard was pretty doggone fascinating based on where you ended up.
Well, when I started to school, I was just 5 years old, and because of being on Christmas, you had to be 6 before the year changed. So I was, but just by 5 days. So I was the youngest and smallest kid on the bus going to school. We lived out in the country. There's a lot of, this is in the early 50s, if you will. So there's a whole social order and change,
Sure. Things
were kind of common thing, and it was tolerated. It was just a fact of life,
Right.
Butch down the street beat you up, took your lunch. Things happened like that. You kind of rub some mud on it and get up and go because it was just going to happen.
Right.
And people didn't get all upset about it. We didn't have any meetings and things. Not to say that's bad. That's good. We were more conscious of that. Now.
Sure.
But the way it was in the 50s was greatly different.
What you were living through. Right.
So I just tends to make you a tough kid. You got to where you just got tired of Butch eating your lunch, and one day you just decided to hit him over the head with it instead of give it to him. And things progressed on that kind of line. But you learn as you grow. Then one summer between 6th and 7th grade, somewhere in there, my voice changed. I put on 30 pounds, and then I went back to school again.
And Butch wasn't so happy then.
Butch, his buddy, anybody that was related to any of them. I became the essence of what I had detested for a while.
Yeah.
Then I met a fella in high school, a principal, a guy from Second World War named Mr. Saldus. And he took me in his office and said, "You're just getting in too much trouble." He said, "What I want you to do is come in here every afternoon. In study hall period, you sit in my office. I want you to diagram football." He was an old football coach. And he said, "Do you understand teamwork and how to get along with people and how to accomplish things?" And of course, I said yes, but I didn't. And he said, "Well, I'm going to teach you another way." And he made me define each football position before I ever played the game of football.
Wow.
I went out for it 1 year before that, but I was terrible and I quit. But he brought me back into that. Wow. He was at the Hall of Fame induction. I had him stand up.
Wow. What a story.
That was a lot of fun.
And
I'm
everybody
talking too much. Let's get back into
No. This is what we were looking for. And I think people are hearing that and they're thinking of that person that had that kind of impact on them. They're saying, "Oh yes, I had that person. I had that coach or that teacher or that principal or whatever." All right. So many of our listeners are super high performers, but they may struggle with hitting a pinnacle and then trying to figure out what comes next. I look at your career, your life, you hit the ultimate pinnacle. I mean, I've got this old news clipping, all-time Super Bowl team. You know, I've got your football card here from I think this is
that clipping's getting as wrinkled.
It actually is, my friend. It's a little bit old here, but you hit it in. Let's see, you were mid-20s. You had the undefeated season, back-to-back Super Bowl wins, MVP in '73, and you were even the guest star on the $6 Million Man, my favorite show, by the way. How did you adjust mentally to being in your mid-20s and looking at your life and saying, "There's like, what else am I going to do? Like, this is, I've hit all of the goals. You crushed. You didn't hit every goal. You crushed every goal you ever could have dreamed of. What then? How did you handle that mentally?"
When I was 11 years old, living in the country, my mother used to go to the grocery store every Friday, and she would come back with groceries, and she would buy me the most current magazine about outdoor life or any of those magazines that promoted the wilderness. And one day I went out to carry the groceries in, and she had bought me an Outdoor Life, and it had a picture of a Kodiak bear from Kodiak, Alaska on it. I sat there and read that from cover to cover. Twice. The ice cream and the shopping bags melted before I brought the groceries in. So when you talk about you hit the pinnacle of your life, well, the pinnacle, yeah, I got to ride that championship route with the Dolphins. But are you asking me, was that my life's mission? Certainly to accomplish something in football was part of it. To take control of your body, dictate the terms, have the discipline to carry it out, and then go undefeated was certainly the pinnacle. And I don't bring that down in any capacity.
Sure.
But the other pinnacle I had was getting to Alaska and seeing the last real wilderness. And that's why I'm talking to you today from
Alaska.
With the virus, we're staying here for the winter. But my objective was to get to Alaska and get to enjoy it and make it to the outback.
And was that present in your mind? So when you were in your mid-20s and these things are just happening in your athletic world, were you at that time already thinking, this is amazing, I'm soaking this in, but these are some of the other things I like to do in my life?
Sure. I was thinking about when can I get my life in order in the time that you just alluded to so that I can work Alaska into this. And I could only take a week or two because between speaking engagements and the things, the promotions, we went to Vietnam with the USO. I did a lot of things in the off seasons. And I would always try to work at least a week or 10 days into getting up to Alaska in the late 70s and in the early 80s. But then after I was really away from football, then the opportunity opened up to where I could start doing some outdoor TV. I always loved to hunt and fish and be in the outdoors. Right. Of course, Alaska is the pinnacle of that. So I was maneuvering, trying to get a situation where I could get a a TV show about Alaska. And then I did that, ended up with North to Alaska. That was the second pinnacle.
Right.
Perhaps not as admired by fans as much. Certainly has its own fans that follow it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a TV show for 17 years called North to Alaska.
Wow.
And Audrey and I traveled around in Alaska and visited different lodges, hunted and fished all over the state. And it led to that same lifestyle, just like we had in football, a very, very thought out diet plan, a thought out exercise plan, the disciplines of those. I don't have to talk to you about how important that is. We had to discipline our camera guys and our whole crew, and we traveled. Here was our diet. It's very easy when you're jumping from airport to airport, even in Alaska, even in the outback, to grab a Big Mac and a whatever piece of apple pie instead of sitting down and eating
right.
The right kind of food.
Right.
So the right kind of food was paramount in both of those situations that I feel like I accomplished something in, particularly. We forget about family and church and all those things. Those are accomplishments that we're setting to the side because we're talking about professionally what
Sure.
I did.
Absolutely.
Okay, but personally, the goals in the family and in the people that surrounded the family, the church groups and so on, was we wanted to spread that around. The diet has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Exercise has even more to do with it. And discipline to carry both of those on.
Right.
Those are the foundations. Those are the things that I think you allude to a great deal in what you do.
Right. Very interesting. All right. So many in our audience are coaches, I mentioned to you, or they're thinking about going that way in their career. You played, now we're not talking health and wellness coaches here, but you played for history's best coach, potentially, in Don Shula. You've talked about him a little bit. He passed away this last May at age 90. What was it like playing for him? What made him so unique? You've touched on some of the things, his focus, the timeliness, the identifying things like eating right and exercise, preparing for the humidity. Were there other aspects that made him unique that you hadn't seen in other coaches in your career at Syracuse, playing for the Giants, et cetera, et cetera?
His exactness for detail. You had in order to play for Don Shula, it would help a great deal if you had universal talent. If you were one of the best wide receivers, if you were one of the biggest, toughest running backs or fullbacks, yeah, that was great. But what you really had to have was intelligence and perseverance and the discipline to apply both. All right? Those three things made the difference in the way he coached. That was his definition of what he was. His attention to detail, his discipline, his perseverance. Those were things that just you had to have in order to play for him. If you didn't have those and tried to play for him, you didn't play very long for him. And that's a fact.
Interesting. So that sounds like something you would see at the NFL level be pretty consistent across other coaches, but you're saying, no, his level of those things it was a different atmosphere.
The best way to demonstrate what you just alluded to is his exactness to detail. How much time do you spend on an offside penalty? I once sat in a room and watched him run the projector back 11 times on an offside penalty. I won't give you the player's name. Thank God it wasn't me. But my sympathy was with that player. He diagrammed every possible reason, from incorrect diet to hemorrhoids to extramarital affairs, of why this fella jumped off sides and what we could do to get him to stop doing that, or what he could do to get him to stop doing that. It happened a couple. You don't make the same mistake with Don Shula in a game 2 or 3 times in your career. That doesn't happen because your career goes somewhere else. Right. If he stops and runs the projector back for you 11 times on a minute thing like just a movement, a shoulder movement, and why did you do that? Did you have a muscle? Did you have a spasm? He shuts the projector off. Picture this now. Think about it.
Oh,
Brad, you're sitting in a dark room with 50 other sweaty men, and you're looking at a projector screen, and you make the mistake, and he shuts the projector off, and you're all sitting there in the darkness. And he says, Larry, why did you do that? Hell, I don't know why I did that. my shoulder moved and they threw the flag, Okay. But that's not the answer.
Wow.
You have to wait for him. He tears it all apart, chops it all up, cooks it, eats it, digests it, craps it out, and then decides on your future based on whether that's how small the 11 times for an offside penalty. He ran the projector back.
Wow.
We counted it. We would set the record. We complain about different assistant coaches, but Shoes, we called him Shoes, a nickname. He had the record. If he sat there and ran that offensive projector back and forth and studied it, boy, you make any kind of, your alignment was wrong. Nothing was too small. So attention to detail, but then the discipline. See, attention to detail is great. The right diet's great. The right exercise program, those are all great. But if you don't have the discipline, the self-discipline to carry them out, you couldn't play for him.
Yeah.
It was that easy. If you didn't have self-discipline, he got tired of hitting you with a stick. The second, third, fourth time he hit you with a stick, he put you on the trading block and you got to go play for someone else, somewhere else. So those kinds of things, when you bring them into your life and you get till this day, it's like this interview we talked about the time. I was in here 20 minutes before because my whole life has been that way.
Right.
When I sat down after football, and you talked about the other thing that I wanted to do because I was in football so young, I decided I'm going to go to Alaska, but I can't just go to Alaska and develop a TV show. Here's how I've got to do it. So I had to have the discipline to sit down and do outdoor TV and other capacities for other people, and then learn the trade, learn how to hire the camera guys, learn how to, where you get a good sound man who can do that in the field where you don't have City of Philadelphia backing you up for batteries.
Right.
You're out here 30 miles or 40 or 300 miles from nowhere and your camera breaks. What the hell are you going to do? Well, you got to have the discipline to think about that beforehand. So those things carried over to what I did after I retired from football and went into the outdoor TV business.
I love hearing that.
Aren't you glad you asked?
No, I am, because I think a lot of folks may look at these incredible athletes like yourself and they go, yeah, but they're just gifted and they had that run. But the conversation we're having is, you say, hey, I learned this here from this principle, and then it was developed further here, and then Shula took over. And then when I was done playing, it still applied. And there are things that any of us can apply. And I love hearing that. You talk about Coach Shula like a member of your family, frankly. That's super powerful. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Well, I think Shula and I had some things in common. We're both born out of Hungarian immigrant parents, grew up in the same area of Ohio, probably 15, 20 years apart, but kind of had similar backgrounds in growing up as a hunky kid in the country. And it was wasn't a fight. Certainly it was a great place to grow up. Ohio was a great place to grow up. We had things in common, but I think his desire to win, he was a little confused. I heard him talk about his childhood and he was a little confused. You'd assume that this guy was programmed towards football right away, and just, an athletic thing was just, he almost became a priest.
Is that right?
And he's a young Catholic boy like I was in Ohio. That crossed my mind for about 15 seconds. But, I'm sure with him, he's a man of faith, extreme faith, deep faith, and a man of purpose, of principle. And, I can give you several examples of that. He would not cheat under any circumstance. It didn't matter whatever the rules the NFL set up for cheating were. Shula's were above that. He didn't, by the time you got to where the NFL might sanction you, you'd already crossed Shula's threshold.
Long time ago.
And his religious background had a lot to do with that. He was a man of integrity. He did not change the air in the footballs. He did not cheat anything. In a couple of situations, it was obvious to me. Once, I'll tell you a short story. I'll try to make it as short as I can. We went out to play Oakland one year, and we were still undefeated from the year before. This is early 73.
Okay.
Went out to play the Oakland Raiders. We had not lost a game in a full season and 2 games in this next season. Go into practice the day before the game at the Oakland Stadium, wherever it was that they were playing at the time. Go into the locker room. There was someone there working construction in the stadium, so we had to use the same locker room that the Raiders had used the day before, or earlier that day. So I go into the locker room, and one of the fellas that played on that team, the Raiders team, was named Well, I won't tell you his name. He was a fellow that played with me at Syracuse.
Okay.
Defensive tackle. Art Toms was his name. No big deal. So I went and found his locker, and I was going to leave him a note that I, crapped in his helmet or something to be funny, because we were just doing the day before workout, and I, chide him because he's a defensive player. We're going to run up against each other. So I sit down in front of his locker, and I'm looking around, kind of looking at his stuff. I'm going to use his locker in the locker room. I notice his game plan. He forgot his game plan.
Ooh.
This is the Bible that you're going to use.
Totally. 3rd and 1, this is the defense they're going to run. If we have a 1st and 5 or 2nd and 5 situation, he's got on his diagram what we're going to do. My gosh, that's like a Bible. That's like the game plan for the defense that we're going to face the next day. Right.
I shut it up immediately, and I went and handed it to Monty Clark, our offensive line coach. And he said, "What is it?" I said, "Don't ask me anything about that. That's yours." And he took it, of course, immediately recognized what it was. He didn't say anything. He just walked off. We play the game. We lose the game. It's close. Lose by just the tiniest bit, right? The end of the game. So I see Monty Clark later. I said, "Monty, what did you do with that game plan? Why did you have the?" He said, "I took it to Coach Shula. Coach Shula said, throw it away." He said, "Throw it away." He said, "If we can't beat them straight up, then we shouldn't beat them." And we didn't. And that ended the winning streak. See, that's a story you don't hear about, Shula.
Yeah, you don't.
And I tell it at my own, suffering my own damage in it, because I figure if you leave your game report behind and you're dumb enough to do that, then maybe we ought to take a look at it.
Well, and that season, didn't you only lose 2 games?
We only lost 2 games that season. Yeah.
So that was one of the 2.
There's cheating is a thing that goes in different increments. And like that game report thing, the right thing to do was fold that up and throw it away and not look at it. And that's what they did. I didn't try to memorize it or do anything. What am I going to do as a fullback? I don't call anything anyway, but I handed over the powers, but Shula wouldn't do that. See? Mm-hmm. So when you talk about discipline, attention to detail, you also talk about moral fiber. He had not only discipline and drive, he had moral fiber to back it up. So he was a great man.
Yeah. Wish I could have talked to him before. All right. Belief is a big part of success with health, wellness, performance. People are sitting out there thinking about, can I do this with my eating or my exercise or whatever it might be? A lot of people don't remember, or they don't realize that during the undefeated season, this is a fascinating story, folks. If you don't know this, your starting quarterback, Bob Griese, he was replaced by 38-year-old Earl Morrall. 38-year-old Earl Morrall. This is a long time ago. This isn't when there were many 38-year-olds playing quarterback. Griese was severely injured, missed almost all the games. I've got down that Earl played 11 of the 17 games that year. Talk to us about Earl's belief in himself and the role that played with the team believing in him and believing what you were still able to do.
Earl, as you mentioned, was 38 years old. And the first thing we did was we chipped in and bought him a rocking chair from his locker because he was 38 going on 39 years old. 39 is a great number, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And we put it in front of his, actually the equipment manager had it, put it in front of his room, put it in front of his locker. And he was 3 lockers down from me. And I got a kick out of it because most people would have been offended by that or something. Earl loved it. He ate that up. He was 39 and he loved it. He got the rocking chair, got pads for it.
Oh, no.
Would sit in it. We'd come in, he'd be sitting in his rocking chair, rocking in it. Instead of being offended by it, he ate it up. He liked that. Great. And when he came into the huddle in the very play after Bob Griese was injured in, I believe, the San Diego game, early in the season, he came into the huddle and leaned into the huddle and looked around and said, "What do you think?" And this is before the radio in the helmet and the offensive coordinator up in the box plotting and all the chess game going on that's like today. It was more like, what can you remember that works in this scenario? So we were very dependent on his mentality to memorize things. But Earl turned it around, came to the huddle, looked at all those smiles and said, "What do you think?" And he looked at me and I said, "It don't make a damn what I think, Earl. You're the one that's supposed to happen." But what he was saying was, do you have any suggestions?
Exactly. Give me something.
Give me something. We'll work with it, And Earl had that, but he also had the game plan memorized. And, he learned that all the places he played at, Detroit, Baltimore, all the places he played. He played particularly for Shula at Baltimore. He's very intense. And we knew that he had it in his head and what to do in the circumstance, but he wanted to know each of us personally, do you see a weak spot that perhaps, the sidelines or myself aren't aware of? And he would ask that. And so not that Bob Greasy didn't. Bob was very intelligent. He was playing a chess game in his head. He's
very cerebral.
Earl, not so much. Earl said, what are you going to hit him in the eye, or we're going to sling it over here to the tight end? Bob wasn't playing the chess match that goes on with the safety and the weak safety and the rotation of the strong linebacker. He wasn't into that. He was more into what works. Let's do that.
Right.
And that worked. But the great thing about that chemistry that you mentioned between Greasy and Morrill was that when Bob got healthy and came back, we were in one of the playoff games, and we were pretty much not on the ropes, but we were bouncing off of them. It was giving us all we could handle. Bob came in and changed, and they shifted gears so smoothly. That's when you have intelligence. Besides just, you can have all the brute force in the world and not strength, and you got this, then this that works and that works. But when you have intelligence and everyone knows what they're doing, you have the discipline to all go in the same direction each time, each play. It might not be where you would personally, I might not get to carry the ball. I might have to block for Jim kick. And we're on the goal line. All those personal stats add up, and they're celebrated even back then. But it didn't matter. The only stat that we were after that entire time, whether Bob was in the game or Earl was in the game, was the win column. Whatever we had to do to win within the rules is what we wanted to do. And you never heard a guy say, well, you haven't thrown the damn ball to me once in 3 quarters. That never happened. No one come over and crying and bitching about not getting this or not getting that. To do what you had to do to win. And with an 800-pound gorilla named Shula on your back, you didn't really care about whether you carried it across the goal line or Jim Kick did. It was gold either way.
All right, so let's chat about stats for a second. And I may have gotten this wrong, but I think I read that you led the league at somewhere around 5.4 yards per carry. Was it 71? Did I read that incorrectly, or is that right?
I don't have a clue.
I mean, because that would be stunning. I bet that would be great trivia. What fullback led the league in yards per carry? It's just stunning.
John Riggins comes to mind. John Riggins would be my pick. And, mentioning what we're talking about today is the discipline and the ability to watch the discipline to do it, the ability to watch your diet, exercise regularly, do those things. There's 2 guys right there.
Yeah.
John Riggins, who's my age, or just about my age. I think he might be a year or 2 younger. And who's the other one that I'm Franco Harris. Franco Harris. Again, I think he's a year or 2 younger. I think John and Franco are just about the same age. I'm not sure. But both of those men I've been around in the last few years. And both of them exercised. When I was kidding around and did the push-up thing online and stuff, right away, Franco answered, and so did John.
Nice.
John's out there doing them.
I love that.
And I got a kick out of it because both of them have the discipline. Franco, for years, even back when we were playing, he and Rocky Blair, I would be around him. And Franco was very much into his diet, watched what he ate. He always eats blueberries every day. I noticed it being around him, at Pro Bowls, different places where I was in his presence. He was very disciplined on his diet. And you assume when he's that disciplined on his diet to where he eats so many blueberries every day, that he's also disciplined on his exercise routine and his general health care, knowing what supplements make the difference and checking with people to make sure you get a balance for your liver and different things. And those 2 guys, there's 2 that jump right out of the past, that are probably qualified to do an interview more than I about the discipline of carrying that out. I'm sure both of them had great coaches in their careers, but neither one of them had Shula. With Shula, it was easy to do those things because you had that size 12E of his stuck right up your butt if you didn't do it.
Or you were out on playing for somebody else after that. All right, so you are still a very engaged football fan. Folks follow your tweets every week during the Dolphin games. Knowing what you know now, and you've touched on some of this, but would you have done things any differently in terms of your physical or mental preparation during your career? You talk about, it sounds like you guys were ahead of the game anyway because of what Shula demanded, but now knowing what you know 30 years later, 40 years later, is there something where you're like, I wish I would have been able to tap into that opportunity or utilize that mental technique or eat that food or take in more protein or any of those kinds of things?
If I had the opportunity to do it all over, I wouldn't change anything. If I could go back and start right after I retired or was asked to leave the NFL, some of us are afforded opportunities to retire, others are asked to leave. I was sort of in the middle of that. Anyway, I think if I had that to do over from the time I left the NFL over again, I would be a little more mindful of my diet. I jumped from 245 pounds, what I weigh now. When I retired or left the NFL, I was like 243 or 45 the day I left. And then I ballooned up to about 293. All right. So 40 pounds.
Sure.
The 40, 50 pound range. And that was because I was involved in the hierarchy of football in the old World Football League or the USFL, United States Football League with Jacksonville. And I got all wound up in that, stopped my exercise routine. I stopped my discipline of eating the right things. Those things got pushed to the side from the time I was 40 until the time I was probably 55. In that 15-year period, I did a lot of damage. I had to have a couple of heart ablations because of situations that cropped up, mostly from not maintaining is what I think happened. And that, when I had that ablation, when they went in and cleared that at the Cleveland Clinic, guy said, he was very frank. He said, you need to exercise and you need to reduce your weight.
Interesting.
Well, Shula's voice, his mouth was moving, but I was hearing, what I was hearing.
Exactly.
And I just decided right then at probably 60 years old, which is 14, 15 years ago, right around probably between 58 and 60, right in there. One day the bell rang and I said, in order to not be,
I'm not going out this way,
shorten my life or be, an invalid in some respect, I'm going to have to change what I'm doing here. So I did. I just started saying, hey, no matter what, I'm going to get up and do so many exercises. Until this morning, I got up between 5:30 and 6, like I always do, went out and did my stretches. I do 12 minutes of stretches on the floor with the legs over, get the lower back and everything loosened up. It's a bad hip. Then I laid there for a while and panted after I did that. Then I rolled over and did 35 push-ups. The real ones, like John Riggins does.
Right.
Not the cheaters like I do, but the real ones. I could do 35. I'm trying to get up to 39, but it's just killing me.
You got it.
And then I took the blood pressure. Well, I took the blood pressure before I started in the heart rate things, and I keep a check on that now. And the weight slowly, when I started all that back when I was in my
14,
late
15,
50s, early 60s, the weight came off. I started to feel better. I met Audrey. She's very much into healthy eating, and we started cutting out the wheat, the gluten, and all the things. I let her go on about that, but she got me on a diet where I eat a considerable amount of red meat, but most of it's moose, caribou, elk, like that. And it's just made a world of difference. I'm back down to my not my playing weight. Playing weight was 237, but I had to run in a wetsuit or rubber suit every day
to get to
stay at 237.
I was going to say, let's see on the card here. Yeah, it says 235, my friend. So that's what we got going there. Remember that?
That's his official weight. Yeah, Don decided that I needed to weigh 235, and I actually argued with him because I wanted 240. I argued with him for a week. He brought in a specialist who weighed us underwater. This place, I had the best. No, I shouldn't say that. I had the second best on the team. The only guy that beat me was like Dick Anderson, defensive back.
Yeah.
For percentage of fat in the body. Mine was, just a tiny bit over top of his, and he's 208 pounds. So Shula said, well, you're right. So he gave me 2 pounds. Boy, ticked me off. I'll never forget. I went in his office. I was all smiles. He said, "Well, you were right. Yeah, right.
Here's two."
I'm swelling right up on it, And then you go, "So what I'm going to do is instead of 235, I'm going to make it 237." And looked at me and smiled like he wanted me to thank Oh gosh, I wanted to. Shula had a great rule, and I'll shut up after I tell you this. You could, in front of the team, anytime he was out in public or in front of the team, particularly in front of the team, what he said went. There was no rebuttal. Smartest thing you could do is say, "Coach, I'd like to come see you after the meeting." And that everybody understood what that meant.
Sure.
I've got something more to say, but I'm going to wait to say
it's
it.
Respectful.
He told us, come in his office, and you could say anything you wanted. So, but as soon as he said that, I went back in the office. I wanted to jump over the desk. Several times he wanted to jump over the desk because we weren't that far difference in age. And he was still a young man. He said, "No, I know you. If I give you 2 pounds," he said, "then you'll only be 5 pounds off." He said, "If I give you 5 pounds, you'll be 8 pounds off." And I couldn't argue with him. He was right.
Well, it's fascinating to me to hear you talk about, so you retired around 40, you were about 245, and then you ballooned up to 293. And you talk about, most people, when they think about football players, they think about the health issues are the things that happened in those 5, 10, 15 years they had a chance to play professional and some of the college years. And you're saying, you know what, Brad? Yeah, of course I had some orthopedic things going on with that, but really my health problems were my own doing. It was the choices I made in that 15 years that followed my retirement, not the 15 years I was playing ball.
As we get older, the things we did orthopedically to our bodies,
sure, they catch up.
Take a larger measure of our existence as we get older, and things tend to shrink up and dry up. All right, for lack of a better description. But right after I retired, I was still pretty much in the prime of life. I was only 35, 36 years, or 33, 34 years old. So I didn't pay particular attention to my diet. I lost that discipline that was being forced on me. So because my time was so taken up with running a football team and doing the things I was doing in the old USFL, I didn't adhere to the discipline that I had learned in the NFL. Now, once I got out of that and started and had the problems, and the doctors at Cleveland Clinic sat down with me and said, "These are the things you need to do." They're talking, and I'm looking at them, and I'm seeing Shula's face where their face is at, because it dawns on me, in order to play, that's what I had to do. So the whole thing comes down to one word: discipline. Yeah. If you have the discipline to do these things, you will be healthy and you will reap the benefits. If you don't, you'll reap the other benefits, which are the shortcomings, and shorten lifestyle, certainly shorten quality of life, which is even perhaps more important to a lot of us than how long you live, is what's the quality of your life. Right. The quality of my life turned around as soon as I lost that weight, had that heart ablation, and started to change my lifestyle. I started to enjoy life a lot more. I went back to Alaska and did a lot of things over. Had a good time.
Let's talk $6 Million Man for a minute here. Now, that was my favorite show growing up. I actually went back and watched that episode where you were the guest star on the $6 Million Man with Steve Austin. And what was that like? I mean, that was the show at the time. All of a sudden, you're on the show. You guys are playing around, messing around. But was that just one of those things like, oh yeah, I'll just go do this, and it takes a couple of days out of my schedule? Or did you really enjoy that? Was that a memory where you look back and go, you know what, that was pretty fun?
I didn't think I would enjoy it until I got there and did it. And, the star of that was a great fella. And we had done some hunting together and done some other things. I met him through another fellow named Burt Reynolds that was a big football follower kind of guy, and got to know them both. And it was fun to go and do it just as a cameo appearance. It was, I'm not much of an actor or TV actor. I don't, that's a whole nother discipline. That's like multiple personalities coming out of something. Kind of, for a football player to do that is kind of, Joe Namath's probably the closest thing we've ever had to something stepping across. But that world wasn't for me. But it was fun to go over there and visit and do that show and be part of that one time. Butkus, I think, was on that show.
He was. And who's the gentleman who was in Rocky? In first two Rockies that fought against him. He was in it as well. There were a lot of stars that didn't realize made an appearance there. Have you stayed in touch with Lee Majors? What is that, or is that something that, hey, yeah, we did that at the time, and that was...
We hung out together there for a while, and I saw him off and on. He was a good friend. He and Farrah are great people. Yeah. We visited him a couple of times out on the coast when we were out there, and I was doing the show in Alaska. We stopped, saw him some.
Nice.
Dinah Shore kind of put us all together. I did a show for Dinah Shore probably in the early 70s or middle 70s, where she had all the Little League coaches on. I was not a fan of Little League as I saw it. I didn't think the kids were safe because the people coaching it didn't have the kind of equipment. You know, there's two 80-pounders running up against each other. It's cute, but it's also lethal if you happen to be one of the 80-pounders, particularly if you're one of the 80-pounders that happens to weigh 91 pounds.
Yeah.
And you're running against each other. Their equipment, the thing I didn't like about the Little League football at that time, and I qualify it at that time, was that it was kind of slipshod on how your equipment fit. I saw fellas with loose helmets. I knew what would happen with that, and the probability of head injury was very high. I saw shoulder pads that were loose, you know, slid over to one side. You know, you can get hurt bad, even if you only weigh 80 or 100 pounds, and you're running into another 100-pounder wide open, which kids will do more readily than men. They'll run into each other the first time. You can really get hurt. And my whole drive when I met Dinah and was on her show was she had a lot of Pee-wee football coaches that were ready to, you know,
strangle you
because I was speaking out against organized Little League football, but I wasn't. I was just, I think that's good that they get together and play that.
Sure.
I think
but do it right.
More caution needed to be taken. Just like the discipline of staying healthy, the things you do with exercise and health and diet. On the field, you have to have the discipline to make sure your equipment is right and fits you the right, correct way, and it does the most for you.
Right. Good. All right, we've talked about some of the things you've experienced, the Hall of Fame induction in 87, obviously the undefeated season, the Super Bowl MVP. Is there a special memory from your career that might surprise people that think back, they knew you, they followed you, and they hear this and they go, what? I've never heard that before. Is there a special one that kind of follows that line?
I think the fondest memory I have, of course, is right after winning Super Bowl VII of seeing Shula hoisted up on the other fellow's shoulders and holding that Lombardi trophy. I think that was done as much for him as it was for ourselves, or as much for ourselves as it was for him. He was a driving force in it, but I knew what it meant to him. Having lost, in the early Super Bowl with Namath there, and then having lost Super Bowl VI with us, what it meant was he had established the fact that it could be done. Not only it could be done, but you could achieve perfection on the way. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think Don Shula, when he stood in front of us after Super Bowl VI and said, we need to go one game at a time with the idea that we're going to win every game, I don't know that he believed what he was saying there. In other words, he wanted our attitude to be that we need to win. Each one's going to be the Super Bowl. Then we can't go wrong. Yeah. That's what he wanted, that desire. That, Jim Kick looked at me and said, boy, this year's going to be a bitch. But that's the kind of dedication, that's the kind of concentration that it takes to get to that.
Well, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking the folks that are really focused on their health and wellness, or maybe they're even coaches helping other people do that, it's the same thing. You go into it thinking, let's make every decision count. Let's make every day count. But we're not expecting perfection. You're going to have days when you just want that ice cream or whatever it is. And that's okay. But we strive for, what was it Lombardi that said we strive for perfection and we reach excellence or something like that? I mean, it sounds like that was his message, is let's strive for this. And then even if we come back a step, we're going to win this Super Bowl. And that's what really matters. You could have stopped Don Shula in mid-sentence there, which wouldn't have been a good idea. But if he would have, he would have said, no, I don't mean that we should go undefeated. That wasn't what he wanted that dedication to it, like we were going to do that. He didn't know that he was making a prediction there. Right.
He thought he was drawing an analogy of what was to be versus what is.
Right.
Turns out it was a prediction.
Right.
And Jim's Kick Mick's response was a prediction as well, because
And
I've
he
never
was
been
accurate
through a
too.
year like that year. Particularly when we lost Bob Greasy in the fourth or fifth game.
Cannot imagine.
There was a very sad huddle, and Earl Morrall ran in there and looked at us and said, "What do you think?" It was a very sad huddle because we figured our hopes were dashed.
Right.
But lo and behold, we had another Superman. He just tied the cloak on and said, "Follow me, boys," and down the hill we went.
So many stories.
Great atmosphere of personalities too, of all the different people. I think the most common. Someone asked me the other day if you had to name one common factor that was true on all 40 players or 44 players and coaches and supporting staff, office staff, all the whole thing. You had to name one feature. What would it be? What asset would be the thing? And I said, intelligence. To be smart enough, to care enough, to put yourself second to the team winning, where you care more about the win column than you do about your personal statistics, more about your defensive unit than winning as much as you do your offensive unit, the special teams. It all came together that way, and it was due to that one guy. You got to have a pivotal guy driving that. And that was Shula. That was the guy.
Well, and I'm thinking, and again, my stats may be a little off here, but I think you and Mercury Morris were the first pair in history to both go over 1,000 yards in the same season.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself is incredible. That to think about the way you work together like that.
Well, Mercury and I were the two most used running backs, but Jim Kick was the third in that offensive backfield. And he was used off and on in the passing situation and short passing on a halfback short option pass because he was so quick and tight and would get free and get the passes. If you take Jim Kick's rushing yardage and his passing yardage, all three of us went over 1,000 yards. Wow. That's the kind of balance you had there. See, that discipline, we keep coming back to that.
Right.
Didn't matter whether it was Jim or Merc got the call. The linemen, they were blind to that. What they cared about was making the play work, and they were going to make sure that whatever their contribution was made twofold. They were going to make sure it was perfect.
Wow. And
Jim Kick and Mercury Morris, they could have got back then. See, first and second team was very divisive thing. I mean, it was very, very disciplined. This is first team, this is second team. It was very regimented that way. But when Don Shula decided to put Mercury in and blend him in and move, that was a great revelation to the game because the substitution rules had changed and you could do that. Prior to that time, back in the 50s and the 40s and back in the 30s, you couldn't exchange players like that. Well, take advantage of that new rule because we went all through the rule book. Don knew it forward and backwards. He quoted to the referee, page and paragraph. He knew it, and he knew there was an edge there. See, intelligence. And then having players intelligent enough and strong enough men to not get their egos in the way and say, okay, Larry, Jim, Mercury, you're all going to be in different. Sometimes you're going to be in the beginning and first quarter. Sometimes you're going to be in the fourth quarter. We're going to substitute you different ways. Well, who's first team? Well, it doesn't matter anymore who's first team. Now, that could have been divisive.
Yes.
A lot of people would have had their egos get in the way and be divisive. But when Shula's harping at you so hard in that heat and trying to get through and discipline, the last thing you were worried about was whether you got to carry the ball. You just want to get the damn thing across the line so he'd shut up. So when Mercury would come in, the only time I ever heard Jim Kick bitch or moan about Mercury Morris coming in is when we were down close to the end zone. And it wasn't because of the end zone. It was because of the fact how far he had to run to get off the field.
Because of course.
He didn't want to run a 40-yard sprint, get a play, and then come back the next play. If we did it between the hash marks,
he runs 20 yards.
To the 50-yard line, he could just walk off. He didn't mind it then. But if he had to go clear down by the end zone, then he pissed him off.
Oh, that is so good. Oh, Larry, thank you so much for doing this. I want to make sure people can keep track of you. I mentioned Twitter. They look you up under @Larry Csonka. Your website is at larrycsonka.com. Is that the best way to keep track of what you're doing? Or if they want to get you out there for speaking engagement or something, is that the best way to find you?
Brad, I got to tell you, larrycsonka.com. Go on there. And then on game days, we formed a little army that I never realized. I never appreciated my cell phone. I never got into all that. Audrey, till this day, still takes it out of my hand because I'm just but she's with me on game day, and we've literally developed a following, an army.
Yeah.
Not just of Dolphin fans, but of, recently I was a Washington fan because they had to take Pittsburgh out. And sometimes I'm a Pittsburgh fan because of how that affects the Dolphins. And I've always been a Giants fan, and then pulling for Washington. Giants fans are getting
right. They're like, "What are you doing?"
Game day. So I started to say on Twitter day. On game day, which is Sunday, Monday, and Thursday, sometimes Wednesday.
And now, yeah.
But we get on there, and I started hearing from guys that I played in high school with, guys I played junior high with, guys that I played in college with, guys I played in the pros with. And now I'm starting to hear from some of the other teams, the guys that played on other teams opposite me during the course of my career in those same revelations. And it's fun because we start saying really comedic things to each other.
Right.
When remembering, you see what you see on the TV, and then remembering in a high school play back from 1965, what happened, and it just creates a lot of conversations, brings back a lot of memories on things that I thought were gone, is what I'm trying to say to you. Those relationships that I had in junior high and high school and college and then the early pros, that I thought I'll never see those people again. I'll never hear from them. Twitter has changed all that. Yeah. And now I get on game day and I start talking to people, and I find out it's somebody I knew, and I'm like, damn, where you been? And they start telling me, it's a whole nother social thing that we've got, that it's really been a blessing for me. I enjoy it a great deal. So if you're not doing anything, jump on there on game day. It's
exactly. Watch when the Dolphins are playing, and he'll be right there.
What I think they should do,
Yeah, I love it. Larry, this was so much fun. Yeah, you're a guy that I looked up to. You were the guy that whenever we played out in the yard and we'd pick a guy, like, okay, you be Billy White Shoes Johnson and I'm going to be Larry Csonka. I mean, I always wanted to be Larry Csonka. So I didn't quite grow into your size. I'm about $150, so not quite that 245 or 237 that Shula gave you. But man, it's been fun following you. It's been fun catching up, seeing what you're up to. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. This was great.
Enjoyed it, Brad.
Take care.
Do it again sometime.
That sounds great.
All right, partner.
How fun was that? I hope you enjoyed the walk down memory lane and the application it has for each one of us as much as I did. Thank you for tuning in to the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. Next week's guest, we're going to stay with the sports theme here, is 3-time Ironman world champion Craig Alexander. When we released the video version of this interview over at youtube.com/coaching channel in advance about 6 weeks ago, it immediately became one of our most popular videos of all time. When you hear the stories and tips this humble champion shares, you'll know exactly why. As always, if you have any questions about pursuing a career as a health and wellness coach, we're happy to connect. Just drop us a note, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can access a library of resources at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now it's time to be a catalyst on this journey of life. The chance to make a positive difference in the world, not by burning ourselves out, but instead by simultaneously improving our own lives along the way. This is Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.